Hi friends, it's Mrs. McVeigh. I hope you all are doing well. I'm going to do a teaching video about folk tales to help start you off and guide you for your reading lessons this week. We're going to be doing folk tales this week and a little bit with fables next week. It's a pretty fun unit, so I think you'll like it. So what is a folk tale? Some of you might already know, and that's awesome. And maybe you want to pause it and tell someone at home what you already know. And then you can check back in and see if you were right. So I'm going to use this little PowerPoint to help us go through. So we're going to talk about some elements of folk tales. All right. So a folk tale is usually passed on from generation to generation. It's usually passed on orally, which means by word of mouth. They'll usually talk to each other. So you see a picture of them sitting around a campfire, maybe with some friends or family, and talking about what they know. Folk tales were made up to explain the wonders of the world and to teach morals and lessons in life. We learn lessons every day in our life, right? What not to do, what to do. You've already learned by now not to touch a hot stove. You've probably also learned what makes your parents a little bit mad. You're learning lessons not to do those types of things. So there's some different types of folk tales. Trickster tales, fables, pourquoi stories, and fairy tales. If you're wondering what pourquoi is, you're going to find out soon. Don't worry. All right, trickster tales. One character is usually the protagonist, and that's the main character of a story, and they're a trickster that causes problems for the other characters. Unfortunately, they usually go unpunished, and they get away with it. I'm sure you don't get to get away with stuff at home that much, but you're a trickster, huh? All right, fables. Fables, these are stories that teach a lesson or have a moral to the story. The main characters of fables are usually animals with human characteristics. So we know that animals don't usually talk, but in fables, a lot of times the animal is going to talk or act a little more like a human. The moral is never stated, but needs to be inferred by the reader. Remember, infer means to use kind of clues from the text and things we already know to make those big assumptions about what's going on. So what do we assume we're supposed to learn from this story? So it doesn't always tell you, hey, you're supposed to learn to walk before you run or take your time with that task. It actually usually, you have to kind of infer and make those assumptions about what you're supposed to learn. Examples, the tortoise and the hare, you'll be reading that this week, and the ant and the grasshopper. All right, pourquoi stories. Pourquoi literally means why in French. So pourquoi, it explains why and how something happens. Examples are how the elephant got its trunk is a story, and how the tiger got its stripes. Most are just myths, so they're not true, but they're believed by certain groups of people to be true. All right, another one is fairy tales. It usually includes a good and evil character. It has a hero or a heroine, magic. A lot of times it's going to begin with once upon a time. And the conflicts resolved through kindness, courage, or intelligence. So those are like Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Aladdin. A lot of our Disney movies, the older ones from when I was a little girl, were the fairy tales. And they also have a lesson to be learned. So common elements of folk tales, they usually happen in sets of three. Usually it's going to be three things that happens. 3 characters, 3 events, 3 tests, 3 wishes for the Aladdin and the magic lamp. It just is usually going to have groups of 3. So the beanstalk had Jack climbing the beanstalk 3 times. I believe he had 3 seeds. Snow White visited her stepmother in the forest 3 times. It's just a very common number in them. And magic is usually going to be in there. And things you can't explain, like how did that happen? So that's another common element of folktale. You're also going to see similar characters from stories all across the world. So they might be taught a little different or might have a different name to them, but they're going to have similar elements. Themes are going to be good versus evil, So people that are good, people that are bad, an animal that might be good, an animal that might be bad, characters that go through tests. And the good is usually rewarded and the evil is punished, usually to show you that you should be good. It's usually a teaching lesson. So if we think about that, these things were taught all through time, hundreds and hundreds of years, these stories have been passed down. Why do you think that they've been passed down? Well, probably so that they could teach their young ones good or bad. Things that are okay to do and things that are not okay to do. And a lot of times we learn those lessons through someone else going through it. So I know for myself, I'm the youngest. I have an older brother and an older sister. So if I see them do something bad and they get in trouble for it, I'm gonna learn through that. I'm not gonna do that because I already saw them do it. So the same thing happens in these stories. If we read about a certain thing happening, we're gonna learn, oh, I don't wanna do that, or I don't wanna be like that. Because if it makes someone sad, or they get punished, or something bad happens in the story, we don't want it to happen to us, so we're not gonna do it either. So we're gonna learn from them. So I want you to remember as you go on this week, reading about all these folk tales, these fairy tales, I want you to keep thinking, what can I learn from this? How can I apply it to my life? Because that's really what we're trying to do. We're gonna be working on other things like, well, what elements are in this story? How can I prove it's a folk tale? We might work on, well, what things make it a folk tale and where's my evidence for that? And then, but eventually we're gonna get down to, well, what did I learn from it? And how can I retell the story in a way to other people where they can learn from it? The last couple things I'm gonna just talk about is that all stories have characters, they have settings, and so that's also obviously going to be in this. So a lot of might have magic helpers, such as the godmother, the fairy godmother in Cinderella, and a lot of times you might have a hero. And then the setting, they're all gonna have usually like a place that is imaginative, like a cottage in a wood or a magical kingdom. And then the time is usually gonna be a fantasy time, and we'll know that because it usually will say once upon a time or a long, long time ago. So now that you know a little bit about folk tales, I'm hoping that that's gonna help you throughout your week, be able to answer our questions and fill out our graphs that we're making. As always, check in with your teacher for more questions so we can help you, because that's what we're here for. But we miss you and we wish that we were teaching you in person. But take care, guys. Bye.